So welcome to Stronghold Breaker week number 4. I apologize that I uploaded this late. Long story short, it was a scheduling error on my part. So I wanted to give this the full time and attention that it deserves. This is going to be a little bit of a shorter one. Okay, so week 1, we hit on porn is not the problem. It is the solution. You are using pornography as the solution to an underlying problem. So we set out to identify those problems. Are you using because you're lonely? Are you using because you're just bored? Are you using because whatever the reason is, to really get down to the root of that and then think, okay, what is the actual solution to this? What is the godly, biblical manhood solution to this? So I can choose the actual solution and stop using the drug that just kind of numbs it temporarily. So that was week 1. Week 2 was using the power of Jesus' name and repenting immediately after every use and just learning to break that shame off. So that way, whenever we do use pornography, that we're not stuck in a cycle of shame and we can declare Jesus' name over it, and the power of sin will be broken whenever we use his name. And then last week, we went through the Proverbs, which if you're in the February challenge, you read through Proverbs 5 through 8, which hits so hard on lust and on the wayward woman, and the wayward woman is the woman in pornography. So this week, like I said, this is going to be a little shorter, but it's a little more concise and a little more hard-hitting, and it's really just this, okay? Pornography lies. It is a lie. You've heard this. You already intellectually understand this probably. But here's what I mean by pornography lies. Sex does not look at all like what you see in pornography. It just doesn't. It is not what you see in pornography. That doesn't mean there aren't certain positions or like whatever, but everything that you see in porn, it is all a show. Those women are not enjoying it, and neither are the men. Watch some testimonies of people who have come out of that industry. They hate it. Many of the men, guys, they even taking ridiculous amounts of Viagra, they can't get and maintain an erection, so they have to get a shot in their junk in order to force them to maintain an erection, and they just act. It is all a show. It's not real. It's not real. Real, true, intimate, godly, God-glorifying, euphoric sex is exclusively within marriage. And many people who have not been married think they already know what sex is all about, and they don't. Because locked on the other side of the door of marriage is where the true meaning and deep intimacy of sex, that's where it lies, is on the other side. Now, sex is still still very physically pleasurable. And that's why, we use pornography and we lust about it and we probably fantasize about it, at times, even if we don't want to, because it is physically pleasurable. But I'm telling you, as someone who did not save himself for marriage, literally none of the sex that I had before I got married compares to any of the sex I've had in my marriage. Why? Because before I was married, gentlemen, it was the meeting together of two bodies, and it was two passions. And yes, there are things with the soul and there are things with the spirit and so on and so forth. And so we can't take it lightly. Even with pornography, we cannot take it lightly because our souls and our spirits are wrapped up in it. But in marriage, it's not just the bodies, but it's also the souls and the spirits that come together in union. And that level of connection and intimacy and love, gentlemen, does not compare. There's just nothing that compares. And so when I finally kicked the habit of pornography, it's like the Lord had finally successfully beat into my brain. My skull is so thick, it took a decade for it to finally sink in. But I finally just simply believed this fact that I had heard, but my actions proved I didn't believe it. I finally just accepted this fact. Everything outside of marriage is a cheap knockoff and a lie. I choose to believe that what God has in front of me in marriage is better than any of this. I didn't want to take pornography addiction or the corruption that it causes into my marriage. And to God be the glory, 6 months before we got married was the last time that I used pornography. So when we did get married, my brain was so de-pornified, it had no effect on our marriage. And so my encouragement to you is you have to understand what the real true purpose of sex is within marriage. And it has, obviously, the most apparent purpose is the bearing of children. But God ties that, the greatest responsibility that any man or woman will ever have is bearing children. And that is the thing that he ties to the most pleasurable experience that any person will have with another person. And 65% of that fulfillment and pleasure that we chase in pornography and even sex outside of marriage is not found outside of it. It's only found inside. When you go to pornography, I hope my voice burns into your brain the next time that you're trying to use pornography, the same way that my mentors and my friends, their voices were burned into my brain. It is a lie. It's a lie. Don't believe the lie. What you're doing is essentially the equivalent of there are certain drugs that are very addicting because they mimic an actual thing that our brain is meant to do whenever, or meant to experience whenever we do something. So dopamine is that deep feeling of satisfaction that you feel whenever you accomplish something, when you accomplish that workout, when you meet your goal, that just deep sense of satisfaction. Well, heroin, when you take it, releases dopamine in the brain in super high volume. So the reason heroin becomes instantly addictive for everybody who takes it is because the brain is convinced that it just achieved an extraordinary achievement. And so then small achievements like making your bed or working out or whatever, they don't feel as rewarding anymore. So they go back to the heroin and they go back to the heroin. And eventually the only way they can feel satisfied is with more and more and more and more heroin. Reality is the real thing is the actual work that you do that you receive that feeling of satisfaction when you work out, whenever you reach your goals, when you strive, when you conquer, when you achieve. That level of dopamine it's euphoric. It feels amazing. And even though the heroin actually has higher levels of dopamine in the couple of minutes that they're experiencing it, they'll never have the fulfillment and the satisfaction that the person over here has. They have some feelings of euphoria, yeah, but they don't have this. They don't have the real meat of it, the long haul, the deep sense of fulfillment in their chest. They don't have it over here. And so the people who use this are a fool. Well, gentlemen, here's pornography. And here's sex and marriage. Why chase this? That's only a fraction of what this offers over here. And so many men, unfortunately, think to themselves, okay, well, I just need to hold out until I get married, because once that happens, I can just have as much sex as I want and it won't be a problem anymore. No, you will still have to fight some lust in marriage. It sure makes it a heck of a lot easier, I can tell you that. But you will still fight it, because you have to get to the root. Now, I will say this too. Full victory over lust is possible. It is possible. It's possible to fully break free from it. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't come and nag every once in a while, because it will for me. It'll pop up and it'll nag. But its power over you can become so completely diminished and put to zero that it's like not a big deal. It's like, man, I have to try really hard not to steal every time I go in the store. It's like, no, I don't really have to. Yeah, sometimes I'll look at something and go, it'd be really easy for me to grab that and nobody would know, but I don't steal from the store. And so similarly, the Lord broke that for me. And so I don't lust after another woman. So the same can be done for you. But we need to readdress and go back to week number 1, just the principle. Think again about where the root of porn is coming from. Why are you choosing to use it? Lust is not this phantom thing, gentlemen. It comes from somewhere. Now, part of it is our natural desire, yes. And that natural desire, until you get married, you have to contain it. You have to learn to point it in the right direction. And I'll give you some tools for that in a second. But you need to figure out why you're choosing it, because all addiction comes from people who are trying to cope with something. So you want to know how my high caffeine usage started? It's actually about half what it used to be. I was drinking 2-3 bangs a day, which is nearly 1,000 milligrams of caffeine if you drink 3. 2 is 600 milligrams of caffeine. So now I drink a Monster or 2, which at max will get me about 3 something, so a little over what a bang is. But regardless, you know why? Because I was coping with constant anxiety of failing. I was so terrified of failing that I drank copious amounts of caffeine because I felt like I needed it to be my best. And so I just drank it all the time because I felt like I needed to be at my best 110% of the time. So pornography, if you're using it or using it daily, you're coping with something. Take it to God and ask him, because he wants to set you free. Ask him what it is that you're coping with, and he will show you. Write it down if you have to, and then ask him as well, or look in his word, or even just use the knowledge and wisdom you may already have and figure out what are the godly solutions to this. I'm lonely. Okay, God, show me why I'm feeling lonely and what the heck I'm supposed to do about it. Yeah, it turns out we're made for community. I'm bored. Yeah, it turns out a man is made to go and do stuff and conquer and build. I know one guy who every time he felt lust, he'd go for a run. And sometimes you'd see that dude and like he was like just hauling butt. It's like he would just go for a run, go for a run, go for a run. He would channel that energy in a direction and he would turn it into running. But going back to what I said, pornography presents a false idea of what sex is. And so you have to start there. Why use the cheap knockoff when the real thing is so much better? Porn will also do this. It will convince you that you'll never get married. It'll so rob you of your honor and of your self-esteem that the longer you go using it, the more convinced you'll become that you'll never get married. And that's just simply not true. You will get married, because unless God has called you to a life of singleness, which would be indicated by somebody who has no desire to get married, doesn't struggle with lust, that person has been called. But sir, if you struggle with lust and you want to get married, you were not called to singleness. You were called to get married. The scripture's pretty clear about that. So you will get married. I didn't kick my pornography usage and then Kinsey came along. Kinsey came along, and so because of that, I kicked my porn usage. So don't think that just because you're using it means that your wife won't come along. She very well may come along while you're using it, but you can make it so much easier on yourself if you quit it now. So a couple of tools that I said I would give. So I went back and looked, and I said, how to take basically the energy, let's just use that term, that lust brings to the table and point it in the right direction. So lust is inherently related to testosterone. When our testosterone goes up, our desire to watch pornography and stuff like that also goes up. So things that you can do to curb your lust: freaking work out, run. Running is a great way to curb your lust. So you can work out to channel that aggression in a certain direction. You can go for a run. So there's 2. Number 3, go hang out with some dudes. Get out of the house. Seriously. Like, go for a drive. Blast music. Do something. And while you're doing it, don't obsess like, is it gone now? Is it gone now? Is it gone now? Like, no, just go and don't even think about it and don't even worry about it. Um, but getting around other people, hanging out with your friends, stuff like that. So identify, when is lust popping up the most? When is the desire to use porn popping up the most? You've got to change your routines to shake free of that. So identify, go back and re-identify the underlying cause, why you're choosing porn, implement strategies on whenever it pops up. I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to hop on school. I'll just open my Bible. Guys, there was one time in life I was like, I had like 1,000,000 Bibles. I covered my entire bed with Bibles because I was like, if I'm going to lay down in bed and then start to get tempted to use pornography as I'm falling asleep, I am not going to do it right after moving a ton of Bibles and sleeping with them right next to me. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. We simply have to break the habit. And so here's my final encouragement to you. The longer you go without, the weaker lust gets. A man's testosterone peaks about 72 hours after orgasm. Like we're meant, God actually meant, and here's a tip for you in your marriage, we're meant basically to have sex every 72 hours. After 72 hours, our testosterone and the way that it responds to our sex drive levels off, because God designed our bodies to know, I am not in a time frame in which reproducing is a priority. And so it'll level off, and your desire will start to level off too. And you may have some waves like this, but those waves will get smaller and smaller, and eventually you're going to feel immune. For me, I had to deal with some pretty intense waves for about 2 weeks. And then after that, they started to really lessen. And 6 weeks later, it basically wasn't a temptation. And I could remember a few strong temptations in month 2, 3, maybe 4, but it just wasn't a big deal anymore. So go back and identify those underlying causes. Now that we've had a few weeks, it'll be good to go back and readdress and rethink those through. Implement some strategies that I gave you. If you need some more, shoot me a message on how we can tackle those things. Number 3, remember that God's design for marriage and sex is infinitely better than what sin and our flesh tells us. So your sex and marriage will be 1,000,000 times better than anything you could experience outside. So why settle for this cheap knockoff that just robs you of your confidence and your joy and convinces you that you're not going to get married anyway? Don't do that. Just believe. Just simply believe what God says, because I promise it's true. As someone who's experienced it all, it's true. God's right. And all it does is just bring regret later. So those 3 things. And then I would encourage you to go back and read some more Proverbs if you need to. Let those truths soak in. But next week, really 3 days from now, I really want to dive deep. So if you can jump on the live call, jump on Thursday. But until then, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the group.